Ladies and gentlemen, we have a great show for you tonight. Rosa Parks will be here. Emmett Till will be making an appearance. You're even going to hear from your local KKK representatives. And Orville Faubus will be here to talk about his infamous Little Rock 9 incident, among others. The first of our guests in this decade of review, the 1950s, is Linda Brown. Nice to see you. I'm glad you could join us today. So, Linda, it's 1959. You're now 16 years old. But when you were 8, how did you feel about the trial, Brown versus Board of Education?
It was a lot, but I mean, every day I would have to walk by a white school, and I couldn't go, and I had to go way, way far away to my school, and that was it didn't have enough material, we didn't have enough books, and it was just terrible. And so now I'm able to get a much better education. I don't have to wake up 2 hours early. I only have to wake up 1 hour early now, and it's just so great that I can finally get a quality education.
Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's go back and talk a little bit about the trial itself and what happened leading up to it. Now, your family, of course, was a little upset that you had to walk by a white school on the way to school. What initially were their thoughts?
They were mad because I had to walk for like 20 minutes to my bus stop, and then I had to go, and I had to go so far away to this school when we lived right next to a school already.
And I'm sure the verdict pleased everyone. I mean, the Brown versus Board of Education verdict, ruling that they would reverse Plessy versus Ferguson, creating segregation essentially illegal because, in fact, it is, of course, not equal by definition. How happy were you when you heard that you had won?
I was extremely happy. It was definitely hard to get integrated being in the South, but it became possible over the years, and now it finally can be. At first, I wasn't able to even attend my school because it was so hard to integrate. Well, finally, we can.
Well, we're happy for you. One last question before we let you go. How do you think this is going to affect the rest of the country as we step forward and we see more and more progressive movements?
I really hope that together as a nation we can combine and not be segregated and stop looking at race at all, and we can all just live together happy and free.
Linda Brown, everyone.
Thank you.
Our next guest on this decade in review, Miss Rosa Parks. Miss Parks, thank you for taking the time to come and speak with us today.
No, thank
Sit down. All right, Ms. Parks, you've become a national icon so quickly that I think people forget where you started off at. So let's start there. The year's 1955. Ms. Parks, tell us about the event that started the entire movement.
Well, I was sitting on the bus in the segregated section, so the back of the bus, and the white section was full. So a white man came back into the segregated section and tried to kick me out of my seat so that he could sit down. And I said no.
Good for you. Your standing up to him, unfortunately though, did get you arrested, did it not?
Yes.
Following your arrest, what exactly happened?
Well, I was sent to court for the court case Broder versus Gale, and they ruled that buses shall now be desegregated. Integration was now becoming possible, but they decided that it was not a very good ruling, so they sent it to state court, and this spurred many, many more boycotts against buses.
So they ruled that it was illegal to segregate the buses, but then they didn't enact the ruling because they needed to go to the state courts.
Yes. So basically, we went, and the boycotts were continuing all throughout. We went to state court, and the ruling stand for district court. But they still did not think it was a good ruling, so they sent it to the Supreme Court.
So this is just government neglect of the court system. Just keep pushing it out.
Yeah.
Am I correct? And now, before we get to the final verdict, how successful were these boycotts?
I think they were very successful because they showed everyone that segregation is not a thing anymore. It is not. It should not be the social norm.
And the outcome, I mean, as we saw from the coverage during the time, hundreds and hundreds of people walking along the side of the road in protest of these bus companies. Your ability, you and Mr. King's ability to organize the African American community at the time period was absolutely incredible. But now let's take a second to identify the final verdict. So the case has been pressed. You got a ruling anti-segregation from the district courts, but they said, then someone of course said no. Then you got a ruling anti-segregation from the state courts, but yet again it's been pressed now to the national level. So the Supreme Court's handling it. What happens?
Well, as I said, these boycotts were still they were still happening. And I think that really, really influenced the court case because we won. We won. I was so happy.
What a journey to go from being arrested for a basic right of being able to sit in the African American section to then eliminating segregation temporarily on the district level, then at the state level, and then you're not going to want to touch that.
Okay.
And then, of course, on the national level. So now anti-segregation laws have been integrated across the entire country because of the Supreme Court ruling. How do you think the country is then going to continue on from here? This is a small victory in a large war, but how do you think the country is going to take this? You think they're going to run with it, or do you think it's going to be stopped because there's been progress?
I think that they're going to look at this case and they're going to see what they have done wrong, and they're going to change for the better. Desegregating all throughout the nation and integrating maybe even white people with black people in schools, in public areas, and just all around peace and civil rights.
Thank you, thank you very much, Mrs. Sparks. We appreciate you being out.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, next up on our list of esteemed guests is the Emmett Till. Thanks for bringing him in here, Devin. Nice to finally meet you, Mr. Till. So, Emmett, you were about 14, 13 years old, give or take, when your family decided to take a trip down from Chicago, Illinois, into the deep South. Would you mind telling us about what happened in that fateful year of 1955? Emmett. Not very talkative, is he? Looks like I'm flying solo on this one, ladies and gentlemen. So, Emmett Till was a 14-year-old African-American male in 1955 when his family decided to take a trip down into the South from Chicago, Illinois. Now, here's where you're going to find the major difference here. In Chicago, Illinois, there was this thing called de facto segregation, in which it was not done by law but by practice. So African-Americans lived in different areas together. They stayed in those areas, things like that. It was just kind of more ethical to do, I guess you could say, at the time. But down in the South, there was de jure segregation, which was enforced by law, meaning that legally, Emmett Till could not whistle at a white woman the way he supposedly did. Now, this whistle that occurred while he was in the South caused him to be abducted, taken by white men, anti-black activists, and he was beaten for a long period of time, to the point where actually one of his eyes fell out. Following this, he was shot in the head and tossed in a river while tied to a 70-pound fan from a cotton gin, which was secured to him by barbed wire. It was an extremely gruesome presentation and an extremely large smudge on the American conscience. Now, following the discovery of his body 3 days later, Emmett's mother ordered him to be returned to Chicago, where he was then given an open casket funeral. This open casket funeral was done as a symbology to the rest of the nation, to kind of awaken them and show them the injustices that were being committed in the Deep South. It was a time in which these people, these Klan members and anti-activists, were so enraged that they were willing to do things, even to small boys and children, that appalled the rest of the nation. This movement was able to open the eyes of a lot of people and really allow them to gain the backing they needed to go into the next decade and create the movements that they did in order to gain a lot more equality. Mr. Till, you're an inspiration to us all. Thank you. How funny was that with him? Next up on our Decade in Review is Governor of Arkansas, Orville Faubus. How you doing, Orville?
Good to see you.
And joining him today, a special guest, President of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower. How you doing, Dwight? Thanks for coming on and talking to us today. All right. 1957, 2 short years ago, you two faced off in one of the most climatic civil rights confrontations of this decade.
Yeah.
Let's get a little background from the two of you about what happened.
Well, you see, there was a Supreme Court ruling that we had to integrate schools.
Brown versus Board of Education.
Mhm.
Little Linda Brown, who we talked to earlier. Sweet girl, anyways.
And I felt that there would be rioting, which there was. There would be crowds that would try and injure these students, which there was. And so I sent in the National Guard to stop this integration.
Because what was it? Some 9 students had been ordered to attend Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas?
Yes.
I believe it was. So your Little Rock 9 comes in under the federal jurisdiction, and you essentially, in order to keep the peace, took provisions as the governor of Arkansas to stop them. What did you do?
You see, it's more important that as a governor, I keep control of my state, and I make it so.
You know what? Let me stop you there real quick. I'd like to say something. This was one of the biggest movements that we've seen in a very long time. We're integrating black students into schools.
And not just 1 or 2 like it had been in the past. You know, we've seen small integration even prior to 57, because the verdict in 54 established it, but this is 3 years later. You actually have 9 students going to a single school. This was radical.
This is a huge step in the integrating of in all public areas.
So you see, 9 students caused thousands of people to riot and to go crazy and to attack these students. I didn't want these students getting hurt, so I sent in the National Guard to actually do something about it.
Which is a direct attempt to inhibit federal policy, though.
I mean, I didn't do anything to inhibit federal policy. I was just trying to keep the peace and stop 9 murders.
Therefore, I sent in federal troops to stop him from keeping this segregation going, essentially.
And people still rioted, and it didn't work. So,
At your core, Orville, do you believe in the power of the African American and or their equality to the Caucasian race?
I'm not going to comment on that one, but I would just like to say that there was rioting, and my way stopped it, and his way didn't.
Dwight, I'll ask you kind of the same question. A lot of people believe you grew up fairly sheltered and that you don't understand the African American struggle. How do you tell them that? Did you act from your heart in more of a way to assist the African Americans because you felt their struggle, or did you just act solely on backing policy created by the federal government?
I think that it was a little bit of both, in essence. I was definitely feeling for the African American society and their struggle, but definitely I wanted to stand with the Constitution, and I wanted to make this thing happen for the better of the people. So
now, both of you obviously have different ideologies, so I'm going to get a couple of different answers here. But how do you two feel that this is going to affect the country as we move forward into the 1960s, this new decade that's approaching?
I believe that there will be much more rioting, just as there has been. There will be a lot of people who are angry, and there's going to be a lot of fighting between the Negroes and the whites. And especially in my state, I'm sure it'll be a problem. They'll have to.
Arkansas is pretty deep in the South.
Arkansas is pretty deep in the South, and change takes time, and maybe we need to just wait a little bit more time.
Like Slick Willie.
And
But on a more serious note, we've seen that Faubus doesn't particularly care for the idea, but like, what do you think is going to happen at the federal level? How do you think we're going to be able to back up this process?
Well, he's saying that there will be rioting and change does occur over time, which I definitely agree with him. But looking at the long-term consequences of what's going to happen, I'm thinking that we have a very bright future and that people are going to have be persuaded into thinking that this is a good thing. We will be integrated.
Ladies and gentlemen, Orville Faubus and Dwight D. Eisenhower, thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Now up to hear from the opposition, your local KKK representatives.
Yee! Nice to meet you.
Thanks for
Good
joining
morning,
us today,
sir.
boys. I'm glad you guys could come out and talk to us a little bit.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
from the Deep South,
Alabama.
representatives from Alabama, and you represent the Ku Klux Klan. Now, what exactly does your organization run off of?
Well, we just hate the Negroes. White supremacy, sir. That's what we're about.
White race.
I heard you hate Catholics too.
Yeah,
We'll skip over that a little bit. So,
Not good.
you guys are seen a lot as kind of the bad guys in this situation. You lynch people, you make public examples of African Americans, you intimidate them into not voting. How do you respond to these accusations?
Well, I think we're bettering the society by doing these acts. What do you think, man?
White supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
You got a spitter. Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you. You need a buddy?
No, dude.
Okay.
now, with more and more anti-lynching laws coming into effect and civil rights being gained, it is 1959, and by this time, schools are not segregated, the busing systems are not segregated. More and more rights are given to African Americans. What does this make you feel, or what is your organization going to do to kind of slow this process?
Want to take that one?
Well, you see, the white race is better than any other race on the earth. White Protestants are the best, and we need to stay at the top and ensure we can stay at the top so America can be for Americans.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeet!
So, in the future, you're going to continue on in your ways, attempting to inhibit the spread of civil rights through violence and intimidation.
Definitely.
White supremacy till we die, sir.
Worked so far.
That was enlightening. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I
Yeah,
appreciate
thank
it.
you.
You guys have fun back in.
Oh, we will,
Mind if I
we
take
will.
this?
Please.
All right,
please.
thank you.
Okay, so now that we've heard from several representatives of a lot of the larger issues of the time, I'd like to introduce you to two more people who have very bright futures and could possibly affect the coming generation of the 1960s. I'd like to introduce you now to women's activist Alice Paul. Alice, thanks for joining us. And the famed Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Martin, thank you so much for talking to us today. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Now, we've heard a lot about the suffering of African Americans. That's a good idea. We've heard a lot about the suffering of African Americans during the time period as being more of an ignored people. The issues were pushed under the rug a lot, and that's what makes the 1950s being seen as such a stagnant time period in which the only thing that mattered was the white male. But in reality, what we're seeing is a setup for what could be a much larger movement. But On the other hand, we have the other great minority, the women's rights movements. Alice, what have you been doing during the last 9 or 10 years or so in order to better female rights?
Well, in 1946, me and other women's organizations went to the League of Nations to create a treaty to uphold rights for women worldwide. And in essence, it failed. But we went to the League of
United Nations?
United Nations, thank you, sorry. And they built the Commission for Women, and this caused, and this embraced women's organizations and included world peace. So essentially, civil rights were transcending through the nation's borders and into the international.
So not only now have you played a crucial role in women gaining the right to vote, but you've spread your wings and you've taken your talents to the international market in which you now have gained rights for women, not only in the United States of America, but across the world. That is incredible. Now, what are some of your plans going into the future? How are you going to continue this momentum?
Well, going back to the transformation from the 20s to now, I think in the future we are going to draw, well, actually, we're going to draw delegates from these treaties in order to
strengthen women's rights?
yes, strengthen women's rights. Thank you.
Now, Mr. King, you came in to the Montgomery bus boycotts as kind of the new kid on the block. You were young, you were passionate. It's 1955, and you said that you were going to do everything to help that you could. So you helped organize these mass movements of African Americans to help boycott the buses, and then eventually gain your rights of integration of the buses. How are you going to take this power and the influence that you've gained from that time and translate it over into the next era?
I would just like to start by saying, God does great things, and I'd like to thank Him for everything He's done to help us in our movement to become more equal. But I would just like to say, in the future, what we really plan on doing is making some firm legislation. And Alice here, we're working together too to get women in on this, and we're trying to make some strong legislation to actually put power to us and put power to the whole equal rights movement and civil rights movement.
Very nice. So, looking back, as of right now, you each have major accomplishments. What do you think the largest accomplishment each of you have made is?
Would you like to start?
Oh yeah, I would just like to say, every single time, not my accomplishments, but every single time I go out and I rally, it's amazing the accomplishments that everyone else has made just through me giving a speech and just enlightening them on what's really happening. It's just every single time that I can see other people accomplishing so much more than I could have. I would say that's definitely the best.
For me, I believe that going from a domestic approach toward equality for women, and transcending from the national boundaries to international boundaries is really my greatest accomplishment. We're bringing civil rights to all across the world. So
Both of you two have done absolutely incredible things, and
Thank you.
you've revolutionized each of your groups in a way that few others have been able to accomplish. I just can't wait to see what the 60s holds for both of you. I'm sure great things will be in store.
Well, thank
And I
you.
wish that you the best of luck, and thank you for talking to us today.
thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us today on the Stefan Cold Bear Show. You know where to catch us. Same bat time, same bat channel.